Hello and welcome to today's edition of The Timeline. Today we're going to be doing World War I, 1914 to 1918. World War I was also known as the Great War, but we don't mean great as in like, yay, fantastic, we had a world war. We mean great as in size or scope of the war. It was the first war that had involved the entire world, as its name implies. Later on, as we realized that we're going to have a second world war, we couldn't just keep calling it the World War. So then we started numbering them in retrospect. Now we've had World War I and World War II. Hopefully we never have World War III, because we might not survive that. World War I is hard to teach. It doesn't make a good story with a strong beginning, middle, and end. In some respects, it was the because we could war, in the sense that this was the first time in history we had access to the sorts of transportation inventions that would allow us to fight anyone other than just our closest neighbors. This is not a good reason to have a war. So, for the purposes of a general introduction to World War I for the timeline, we are going to identify 3 main causes of World War I. Number 1, if someone stops you on the street and says, "Quick, why did World War I start?" They are probably looking for you to say, "The assassination of Archduke Ferdinand." Although really, if there's somebody out there stopping people on the street asking questions like that, you don't really know what their goal is. Anyway, assassination, defined, means to be killed because of your job or what you represent. So we often refer to presidents as having been assassinated. It's not really personal about who they are as a person. It's about their position as president, their job, title, or because of the political ideas that they represent. Defining the word archduke means son of the emperor. In this case, it's the Austro-Hungarian Empire. In 1914, Archduke Ferdinand went on a diplomatic visit to new territories. While there, he and his wife were assassinated by someone from a neighboring empire, Serbia. This brought the allies of the Austro-Hungarian Empire into conflict with the allies of the Serbian Empire, and then allies of those allies got sucked in, and by 1918, close to 18 million people had died in the conflict. Point number 2. Even if Archduke Ferdinand had not been assassinated, there is a strong probability World War I would have happened anyway. As countries started to turn to manufacturing as a major source of income in the mid-1800s, it became obvious that the quote-unquote rich countries of the future would be the ones that had access to natural resources. While a lot of European countries had good militaries and had been in power in the past, what they did not have was access to land, which is where natural resources exist. These small European countries started expanding to other areas in a process called colonization. Colonization meant taking your superior military power out into less well-developed areas and declaring them part of your territory, mostly so you could steal their natural resources. By the early 1900s, colonization was creating a lot of tension between the countries of Europe. Archduke Ferdinand's assassination just gave them the excuse they were already looking for. Point number 3. But neither of these reasons explains why the United States would get involved in a world war. We didn't particularly care about the Archduke's assassination, and we certainly didn't need more land or resources. We already had more land than we knew what to do with. We had already thrown off the colonization of Great Britain and gained our independence. The United States gets involved in World War I, in a big general sense, to get to sit at the big kids' table. If you've ever been at a big family dinner at which the adults all sat at one table and the kids were all stuck together in a may the strongest survive type situation, you will understand this metaphor. At the end of the 1700s, no one thought we would survive as a country, and they were almost proven correct. Then, in the middle of the 1800s, we get ourselves into a civil war situation, and the rest of the world shook their heads and said, "See, we told you so." By the beginning of the 1900s, we had done a lot of growing up and were eager to prove to the rest of the world that we were mature enough to be taken seriously by the rest of the world. When we looked at a history for a model of how other countries had done this, the answer was, prove yourself in war. World War I represents a tipping point in our history when we finally get taken seriously as a world power. One of the most important parts of World War I, when we look at the history, is the way that World War I ended. At the end of the war, Germany was on the losing side. The rest of the world wanted revenge and focused on punishing Germany. They had a lot of their land taken away. They lost their army. They were fined more money than they could ever pay back. Germany spiraled into an economic depression. And this guy named Adolf Hitler was watching it happen. He watched his country go from being one of the most powerful empires in the world when he joined the military as a young man during World War I to being crumbled into dust by the end of the war. Hitler decided to make bringing Germany back to greatness his goal. The people of Germany were so desperate in the years after World War I, desperate for jobs, desperate to be able to put food on the table for their children, desperate to be able to keep their homes, that they didn't always analyze how Adolf Hitler planned to bring Germany back to power again. If World War I had ended differently, if Germany had not been economically destroyed as revenge for World War I, Adolf Hitler quite possibly would not have come to power. And if Adolf Hitler had not come to power, there may have been a World War II about some other issue someday, but it certainly would not have happened like it did under the leadership of Hitler.